Justin Trudeau called an election, and you know what that means. It's another SFO-Trudeau video. I've done a few of these now over the course of the history of my channel, and we vote on the 20th, so now is as good a time as any. First of all, I want to make it clear that absolutely nobody wanted this election, and it's almost insane that Justin Trudeau would call it, because the ball was in his court. For those of you who don't know, Canada works on the British parliamentary system. The idea is, if you have a majority of the seats in the House of Commons, your party is locked in for 5 years. And so, when Justin Trudeau won a majority in 2015, he was locked in for 5 years. The next election saw him win a minority. A minority government is when you don't have enough seats to form the majority, but other parties decide to prop you up in a coalition. And generally, a minority government topples because those other parties have withdrawn support, triggering an election. Didn't happen this time, though. This time, Trudeau just triggered one, out of the blue. And even now, nobody seems to know why. It just seems like he thinks he's really popular and he can try and get another majority. It really feels like a power grab. And so far, it's kind of been backfiring in his face. So a few months ago, this motion went through Parliament. Now, a motion is not a legally binding document. It's not a law. It's just Parliament's declaration of intent. And the motion reads that the House remind the government that a general election was held in October 2019, and sadly note that more than 1.3 million Canadians, including almost 360,000 Quebecers, have been infected with COVID-19, and that nearly 25,000 people have died as a result. And, in the opinion of the House, holding an election during a pandemic would be irresponsible, and that it is the responsibility of the government to make every effort to ensure that voters are not called to the polls as long as this pandemic continues. And nearly everybody agreed to this motion. 320 yeses, 1 no, including all the Liberals, including Trudeau himself. And yet, just a few months later, on August 19th, Trudeau called his election. I can't emphasize enough how dumb this seems to be. Like, there was no reason to do it. Trudeau's popularity was already down. His opponents are actually stronger than they were in 2019. Regardless of how you feel about coronavirus, the population here in Canada certainly does not want to be voting during the pandemic. This has been a deeply unpopular move, and it has exposed Trudeau's baldness in trying to consolidate power. Trudeau's public events have been marred by protesters.
And I am so proud of the way we worked together. I'm so proud of the way that our government was able to stand up for people here. And you know what? We did it. We won. You guys are still able to export to the United States on privileged terms, thanks to our collective success then. And the same thing happened when COVID hit. When COVID hit our government, our Prime Minister knew this was an extraordinary moment. And he knew.
At one point, his campaign bus was blocked in by angry people. At another event, people threw rocks at him, and by the way, that's assault, guys. Don't go throwing rocks at anybody, alright? He has had to cancel events due to how deeply unpopular he is. Hey Trudeau, remember how Liberal leaders used to deal with protesters in their way? I sure do. Over the course of the campaign, the Canadian polls have looked something like this. The Liberals down, the Conservatives up, the NDP sitting in a comfortable third place as they always do, a complete destruction of the Green Party, and the PPC is slowly rising up. However, now that we're closer to the polling day, the Liberals and Conservative are both neck and neck, but not because the Liberals went up, but the Conservatives went down. Instead, the PPC is rising. Now, I'm not somebody who's breathing in a shit ton of copium. There is no chance the PPC forms a government. They might get a seat or two here or there. But at this point, the race is basically neck to neck. During a campaign stop, Trudeau is asked about his own campaign violating COVID restrictions by jamming so many supporters and journalists into the same room at once. And in the usual Trudeau fashion, he completely dodges the question. Yes, the video's from Rebel News, and I don't like those guys either, but they pulled it from CPAC. This is not some kind of a trick. This is the real deal. Check it out.
There are definitely more than 25 people in this fairly tight and crowded space, and provincial law in Ontario currently limits indoor gatherings to 25 people. Are you breaking the spirit, if not the letter of the law, to hold a party event and lecture the Premier of Ontario on vaccine passports?
I think Canadians are facing a really important choice right now. The big decisions about our future, they're being made now and in the coming months by your government.
I'm not sure that was an answer to my question. So did you get special clearance to hold an event that exceeds current crowd capacity in Ontario indoors?
We're going to continue to do everything we can to keep people safe. We will always follow public health guidance. We will follow the best recommendations of the public health experts advising our campaign. And the first and most fundamental thing we do is to be able to look at Canadians and say, every single one of our candidates is doing the right thing.
And speaking of coronavirus, Trudeau was basically on the same train as Nancy Pelosi. Back before it hit, you were a racist for worrying about it, and lockdowns or other measures were just conspiracy theories. How dare you even say that we do them? In fact, Canada was so sure of that position that Ottawa sent 16 tons of personal protective equipment to China in February of 2020. Of course, like everyone else, a year later he had changed his tune. Rolling lockdowns, restrictions, mask mandates, and now vaccines. And keep in mind, I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I've said this many times all across the internet, and I'll say it again. At this point, I'm pretty sure the vaccines are safe. Yes, there are side effects, there are complications, but the chances of you having a complication from the vaccine are lower than the chances of you having a complication from naturally catching the coronavirus. So generally, for most people, you should get the vaccine. But it is 100% government overreach for them to demand that you get the vaccine, for them to force you to, for them to insist that you show your papers just to go outside of your house. That is not a scientific conversation, it's a political one, and the people who are endorsing it are tyrants. And just like with every other tyrant, the rules don't apply to them. Here's January 26th, 2021. Trudeau is warning about new travel restrictions coming to Canada, and Canada's exposure notification app. And while his official Twitter account was tweeting this, he was vacationing in the Caribbean. Trudeau has repeatedly lied about the status of Canadian readiness when it comes to stuff like personal protective equipment, masks and hospitals and other. Most famously, though, he lied about local vaccine production. He announced that it would be ready in 2021, but the company that his government enlisted soon after clarified they won't be producing doses until 2022. Nonetheless, Trudeau's government is demanding that all government workers get the vaccine. This page dropped August 13th, 2021, and actually was quickly taken down when Trudeau decided that he wanted to call an election and he realized this would be a very unpopular move. So it went up and then down, and it's been scrubbed from the internet. And just in case I couldn't be more clear about my contempt for Justin Trudeau, this explicit threat by a sitting prime minister is disgusting and is completely 100% unacceptable in a free, open, and democratic society.
But the bottom line is, if anyone who doesn't have a legitimate medical reason for not getting fully vaccinated chooses to not get vaccinated, there will be consequences.
As I've said, I'm no anti-vaxxer, and the vaccines work, but if this is how the government is going to behave, I will play chicken with you right up until the end. Of course, it's not just Trudeau and the Liberal Party. All of Canada's left-leaning politicians want to force vax people. At some point, I will need to do a video on Jagmeet Singh, because at the end of the day, he's a terrorist sympathizer, a communist mass murder sympathizer, and a Sikh supremacist, as well as the leader of Canada's NDP. But for the purposes of this video, he is 100% on board with fucking people who don't comply with the government.
We know that the vast majority of Canadians want to do their part to keep people safe and want to get vaccinated. And we also know that the vast majority of Canadians believe in having some way to prove that vaccination, having a vaccine passport. And we know that people on the front line that are providing care or providing services directly to Canadians can pose a higher risk and should be vaccinated. So we would work with unions and work with the workers on the ground to make sure we establish a way to move forward, but we absolutely believe that there needs to be mandatory vaccines, and there would be consequences for those who are not able to or not willing to do that.
Thankfully, the most pull he actually has is streaming Jackbox on Twitch, where he draws Justin Trudeau losing an election to him. Keep dreaming, buddy. The coronavirus has hit everyone economically quite badly, including Canada. Trudeau's plans for a carbon tax increase have basically been destroyed due to the pandemic. And pandemic spending, just like every other Western nation, has destroyed our economy. Canada's current deficit level will be unsustainable within 1 to 2 years. And it's been a year since this was published, so we are on the verge of being fucked right now. And despite the call for more taxes, more taxes, more taxes, taxes remain the largest expense for Canadian families, with the average Canadian household earning $96,333 and paying $35,047 in taxes. That's 36.4% of their income going to taxes, compared to 35.4% going to housing, food, and clothing combined. And although I'm not necessarily a believer in grand conspiracy theories, I do at the very least like to keep a pulse on them. And Trudeau is absolutely 100% on board with the Great Reset.
Building back better means getting support to the most vulnerable while maintaining our momentum on reaching the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the SDGs. Canada is here to listen and to help. This pandemic has provided an opportunity for a reset. This is our chance to accelerate our pre-pandemic efforts to reimagine economic systems that actually address global challenges like extreme poverty, inequality, and climate change.
But considering Justin Trudeau's dim-witted nature, I don't actually think this is part of some kind of grand Bilderberg lizardmen conspiracy theory of trying to create a one-world government. I think Trudeau thinks it sounds good and appeals to his base, and so he's virtue signaling, because almost the entirety of Trudeau's government has been about virtue signaling. This is a man who will appeal to every single issue in the book: anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, women's rights, LGBTQ rights, French language rights, classism, even fat phobia. It doesn't matter. He is a pure intersectionalist. And so, when sometimes these intersections come into conflict, Trudeau is often left holding his dick. This was a scandal over a year ago, when Trudeau defended not publicly supporting LGBTQ rights in Senegal and taking a photo of him bowing towards an Iranian minister who is known for being quite anti-LGBTQ. It turns out you cannot be on the right side of every single issue because they come into conflict all the time. Trudeau has given taxpayer money to support Black Canadian entrepreneurs, again leaning into intersectional, race-based bullshit. Surely we should just be supporting Canadian entrepreneurs regardless of their skin color. A member of Trudeau's cabinet attended an arranged marriage ceremony where a young woman was auctioned to the highest bidder. I guess despite the feminist leanings of Justin Trudeau, selling women is okay as long as it's a beautiful native culture that's doing it. Meanwhile, at the same time, another member of Trudeau's cabinet, when talking about the current Afghanistan crisis, referred to the Taliban as our brothers. Trudeau's government put forward Bill C-6 back in 2017, making it so that people who immigrated to Canada, became terrorists, and committed terrorist attacks cannot be stripped of their citizenship and sent back by the Canadian government. And just like in the United States, the Canadian government has authorized the tearing down of statues related to our history. But unlike the United States, these aren't Confederate statues or something. This is Sir John A. Macdonald, Canada's first Prime Minister. This is an erasure of our history, our identity, our culture as Canadians, by our own government. I know in one of those previous Trudeau videos, I don't remember which, I made fun of Trudeau saying people kind, not mankind. Well, here's some more recent cringe for you. Enjoy.
It is exactly the example of the kinds of things you need to do to counter the she-cession and turn it into a she-covery.
Just like with every other wokeoid, Justin Trudeau's virtue signaling is an act, designed to hide exactly how he does not live up to his own principles. For example, despite Trudeau's lip service on environmental issues, his party has designated environmental protesters as federal security threats. Additionally, during this election cycle, the Liberals have promised to build 1.4 million new homes and ban foreign home ownership. Both ideas that are popular, but also both that they had 6 years to implement so far. Meanwhile, the Liberals' Vancouver candidate, a city where the housing squeeze has hit people the hardest, is known for flipping dozens of homes. A topic which Justin Trudeau has absolutely nothing to say about. His candidate sure does, though.
How much have you profited on those 25 in the past decade?
I mean, I'm not, I think it's important to talk about, I'm going to answer that question again, so I'm going to be sure.
Yeah, how much have you profited on those sales?
When you ask, I'm going to give me a second to just make sure I have the right, okay, so, sorry, ask me the question again, sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
How much have you profited, personally or business-wise, on the sales of those 25 properties in the last decade?
While I can't give you an exact number, what I can tell you is that it is by no means the number that has been put forward, but what I can also tell you is that I am absolutely committed to any and all measures that we have put forward that would apply.
I am still waiting for a number outside here, if he has one. Bottom line, he doesn't seem to think or won't say that his past business dealings are part of this unaffordability problem.
Another of his candidates, I think it's pronounced Raj Saini, has been accused for 6 years now of multiple instances of sexual misconduct. And despite those accusations, despite Trudeau's feminist credentials and his glowing support of the Me Too movement, his party has still allowed him to run. At least until another set of more recent allegations dropped, and Trudeau finally asked Saini to step down. Not without the Liberal Party giving him $93,000, though. Of course, there are actually more legitimate scandals surrounding Trudeau's government. Not just virtue signaling and hypocrisy, but actually violating the law. The most recent high-profile scandal revolves around the We organization, which paid hundreds of thousands of dollars in speaking fees to Trudeau's wife, mother, and brother. And, completely coincidentally, I'm sure, later received a $900 million contract with the Canadian federal government. During a remote-only session of Parliament, because this was early in the pandemic, Trudeau had to give testimony about his involvement with the We charity, and it did not look good for him.
Yes or no question, Mr. Chair. Prime Minister, you twice were found guilty of breaking the Ethics Act. After those two convictions, did you decide to read the Act?
You got 14 seconds, Prime Minister.
Yes, I have read the Act a number of times.
Are you aware of Section 21?
Yes, since I've read the Act, I'm aware of Section 21.
What does it say?
I can pull it up for you, but if you have it in front of you, you'll remind me.
Well, it says a public office holder, of which you are one, shall recuse himself or herself from any discussion, decision, debate, or vote in any matter in which, in respect of which he or she would be in a conflict of interest. Now, what you've admitted today is not just that you were in a conflict of interest, but that you consciously recognized in your May cabinet meeting that such a conflict might exist. That it didn't just slide by your desk, that you were consciously aware that there was an inappropriate link to your family that would put you in a conflict. Why did you, at that moment, not call the ethics commissioner and recuse yourself?
That is simply not true, Mr. Poilievre. The issue of advancing issues for one's own, and by the way, the ethics commissioner is looking into this right now, and I fully trust his judgment on determining it. But at the same time, my concern around recusing myself was a question around perceptions, because I knew full well that this Canada Summer Students Grant Program was not going to directly benefit my mother or my brother.
Your 16 seconds are up. Your 16 seconds are up. I'm going to ask you again, because nobody believes you when you say you don't know how much money your family has got from the We Group. So you've had a month to look into that. You knew you were going to testify here. Again, how much money total have your brother, mother, and spouse received from this organization? How much?
That information has been publicly shared, but I will highlight.
Well, then tell me what it is.
My mother
How much?
has
just the dollar figure.
Throughout her life.
The dollar figure, Prime Minister.
Various ways, and is
how much
of the work that she's done, and I'm proud of her.
How
as well.
much? I'm looking for a dollar figure.
We can get that number for you if you like. It's been out in the media.
It's been in the media, but you don't know it?
I don't have it in front of me. And quite
you don't
frankly,
know how much your family has received from this organization, which you tried to give $500 million, really?
Can I answer, Mr. Poilievre?
I'm waiting. You haven't done an answer so far. Let's make this the first one.
My mother has worked as an advocate.
The dollar figure, Prime Minister.
Speaker for
how much?
Many good organizations across the country.
Mr. Prime Minister, you are being asked a direct question at a parliamentary committee.
To support her because she does her own work, and I'm proud of the work that she does. Point of order. But I do not feel that it is my responsibility to peer into the work my mother is doing, because I have
point of order to suspend
that she's doing.
And eventually he had to come out and apologize for not recusing himself in the We Charity contract decision. But this sort of government corruption, where money's changing hands all the time, is not something that Justin Trudeau is a stranger to. Everyone at this point remembers the SNC-Lavalin scandal. And if you don't, to be honest, it's an extremely complicated topic that I've already done a deep dive into. So if you want to know what's going on, please go watch that video. But Trudeau has been blocking the investigation into him and his party every way he can.
And at that September meeting, the Attorney General reports that she looked the Prime Minister in the eye and said, "Are you interfering with my role as Attorney General? Because I strongly advise against it." Does the Prime Minister remember her saying any such thing?
Honorable Prime Minister. And Mr. Speaker, once she said that, I responded, no, I am not. It is her decision to make. And she then committed to revisit and look into the decision once again, Mr. Speaker. All these are elements in the testimony that we have heard, that the Justice Committee examined exhaustively.
Now the Prime Minister has caught himself in a trap of his own making. He came out on February 15th and said that no one had come forward to raise any concerns about his conduct. And now he admits on the floor of the House of Commons that way before, in September, his own Attorney General asked him to his face if he was interfering. Why is it the Prime Minister having so much difficulty remembering his story? Is it because it's simply not true?
And Jody Wilson-Raybould, the person who ultimately blew the whistle on Trudeau's wrongdoing, has finally been allowed to publish a book on what she knows now that the investigation is wrapping up. Let me read a short excerpt from the book for you. "I know the Prime Minister had always considered me a challenge, not political enough, too independent-minded, and ultimately not part of the inner Liberal crowd. I think I was foreign and incomprehensible to him. After all, I was from the other side of the tracks. I was an Indigenous girl from a small fishing village, Cape Mudge, on the southern tip of Quadra Island, just off Vancouver Island. I am... Jesus, this word, dude. Kawaka-wacko? Okay. Kawak-waka-wacko. Kawak-wak-wacko. Alright. The Prime Minister did not grow up in my neighborhoods, with the kids I grew up with. None of his family went to residential schools. My childhood memories are closer to Comox and Cape Mudge than Rockcliffe. My political point of reference was the big house, not the House of Commons. To be fair, he did not choose how and where he grew up or who his parents were. But Liberals? Political parties? Not my world. There is no question in my mind that the Prime Minister knew there were attempts to pressure me to avoid a criminal prosecution of SNC-Lavalin. And while those attempts failed, thankfully, they were wrong and he knew it. Instead of simply addressing the issue publicly and accurately, the government was sending out talking heads to make comments that evidence has now shown were not accurate or right. I told him that he should be telling Canadians the truth. The Prime Minister seemed to be listening intently. "I never directed," he said, referring to interfering in my role as the Attorney General in relation to the SNC-Lavalin prosecution. His public lines started coming, which were designed to deny responsibility and culpability. "There are differences between pressure and direction," he emphasized. We talked about our soon-to-be infamous meeting with the clerk of the Privy Council on September 17, 2018, where I had asked him directly, when SNC-Lavalin was raised, "Are you politically interfering with my role, my decision as the Attorney General? I would strongly advise against it." He repeated in that airport room that I was not shuffled from being Minister of Justice and Attorney General because of SNC-Lavalin. As he went on, I suddenly blurted out, "I don't want you to say anything further about what happened after September 17th. To this day, I'm still surprised I said it. I know why I did it and why I wanted him to stop talking. I was trying to leave space open for a constructive solution to the mess the PM in his office had created, and that, in my overly optimistic opinion, could still be found. Either the Prime Minister knew everything that had happened and did not care and was clearly lying to me and the country, or he didn't know what had been happening during the months after September 17th to try to exert pressure on me and was not in control of his office. As I had in the past, I gave the Prime Minister the benefit of the doubt, for what would be the last time. I made it very clear I did not trust the people around him and that he was being badly advised in this situation. He made it equally clear to me that he would never fire some of them. So I laid out the only other options that existed. The Prime Minister's office stuck with its current approach of changing its story over and over again, which would only make things worse, in which case I would resign. Or he came out and came clean, and we placed our trust in the truth and in Canadians. I pushed this second option. He said he would think about it and that we would talk again. We met again on February 11th and proceeded to cover the same ground as the day before. I recounted again the incidents where pressure was attempted, and he again had excuses or answers for everything. He repeated that he would not clean house or fire anyone, and then he offered up, if we did, we would not be in government in October. I replied, I would be surprised if we were in government if you did not clean at least some of the house in some way and call some type of investigation. I added, after all, if you're confident you did nothing wrong, then why would you not want to do this? This was about the maintenance of the rule of law and the fundamental tenets of our democracy. Surely this was worthy of our attention. He again insisted no one would be fired. I could see the agitation visibly building in the Prime Minister. His mood was shifting. I remember seeing it. I remember feeling it. I had seen and felt this before on a few occasions when he would get frustrated and angry, but this was different. He had become strident and disputed everything I had said. He had made it clear that everyone in his office was telling the truth and that I, and by extension Jessica Prince, my Chief of Staff, and others were not. He told me I had not experienced what I said I did. He used the line that would later become public, that I had experienced things differently. I knew what he was really asking, what he was saying. In that moment, I knew he wanted me to lie, to attest that what had occurred had not occurred. For me, this was just more evidence that he did not know me, did not know who I was or where I was from. Me, lie to protect a crown government acting badly, a political party, a leader who was not taking responsibility. He must be delusional. Jody Wilson-Raybould, in her capacity as Attorney General, attempted to see justice done. In retaliation, Trudeau, protecting himself and others, removed her from her office and the Liberal Party. And in my opinion, it is quite notable that despite being expelled from the party, in 2019 she ran and won her seat as an independent. And even though I personally do have some differences of opinion with her over other political topics, I can certainly respect her for her conviction. Jumping off of that topic, I think it's now probably important to talk about the aspects of Justin Trudeau's government that are at this point just openly tyrannical. We'll start with the easy one. Free speech has limits, Canada's Trudeau says. If it did, then it would not be free. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau defended free speech on Friday, but added that it was not without limits and should not arbitrarily and needlessly hurt certain communities. We owe it to ourselves to act with respect for others, and to seek not to arbitrarily or unnecessarily injure those with whom we are sharing a society and a planet. We do not have the right, for example, to shout fire in a movie theater crowded with people. There are always limits. Sure, but what certain communities are affected by this? In a pluralist, diverse, and respectful society like ours, we owe it to ourselves to be aware of the impact of our words, of our actions on others, particularly these communities and populations who still experience a great deal of discrimination. Kinda like how in my book burning video, the Germans would ban speech that denigrated Germany or the German Volk. No, this is tyrannical. Freedom of speech means the freedom to insult people. Period. The Canadian military wants to establish a new organization to use propaganda and other techniques to influence Canadians. We are more specifically talking about here the weaponization of the military's public affairs branch. The initiative involves the creation of new research capabilities established to analyze and collect information from the social media accounts of Canadians, non-governmental organizations, industry, and the news media. The Canadian Radio, Television and Telecommunications Commission is now seeking to regulate all content online, including online videos. What we're talking about is Bill C-10, and it applies to any online account that has a large enough following and is based in Canada. Despite Bill C-10 being deeply unpopular, Parliament moved to limit debate and push the bill through. Thankfully, the bill died in committee in the Canadian Senate. But the Trudeau government wants to control, guide, and direct the content that you watch in your free time. The government believes you're not watching the right things, and so they will try to force you to do so. Thankfully, at least this time, they're not going to get the chance. Another bill, Bill C-36, also currently seems to be in limbo, but it would see Canada make online hate speech a crime punishable by a $16,000 fine. And just in case you want to know how draconian and terrible this bit of legislation is, the wording of the bill would allow, for example, Catherine McKenna to seek damages against the person online who called her a climate Barbie. Here is part of the rationale that the Canadian government published for this new hate speech legislation. Canadians expect to be safe and free from hate speech and hate crimes, online and offline. Well, the truth is, no, we don't, because hate speech is still free speech, and if there's something that we don't like, we can always choose not to listen to it. Too many people and communities in Canada are harmed and victimized by hate speech, which is often amplified and spread online. Online hate can turn into offline hate with devastating impacts on communities and families. Sending a tweet. I can't believe I have to say this. Sending a tweet is not the same classification of thing as assaulting somebody offline, and assaulting somebody offline is already illegal. Hate speech is free speech. People should be allowed to say the most objectionable things they want. That's the point. A medical journal in Canada has claimed that the Trudeau government has muzzled scientists. This is rich because Stephen Harper, the previous Prime Minister, and the leader of the Conservatives back then, did the same thing. He also muzzled scientists. And Trudeau lambasted him for it, and frankly, so did everyone else. Nobody in Canada liked that. And yet, Trudeau is doing the same thing. To the point that Justin Trudeau's Liberal Party has the gall to take a Speaker of the House to court to block the release of unredacted records about those same scientists. The Liberal government is taking the House of Commons Speaker to court in an unprecedented move to prevent the release of uncensored documents to members of Parliament that offer insight into the firing of 2 scientists from Canada's top infectious disease laboratory. I can't believe this has to be said, but a sitting Prime Minister does not take the Speaker of the House to court for a political reason like this. And to me, most telling of all is Justin Trudeau's outright admission that what his government has learned from the coronavirus crisis, meaning the ability to centralize all power, control the lives of the citizens, lock down segments of the economy at will, basically how to be an authoritarian. Those aren't powers he intends to give up once coronavirus is over, but his government intends to use those powers on future problems they face.
What we learned from this COVID crisis, we will be applying to the climate crisis, to the housing crisis, to reconciliation, to making sure that everyone has good jobs and careers that carry them through and create opportunities for their kids.
I mentioned early in the video, I am pro-vax, but anti-lockdown and anti-vaccine passport. What really bothers me are the number of people that proclaim to be liberal, and yet they support these illiberal authoritarian measures coming out of the Canadian government right now. And it's not just with vaccine passports. Those are bad enough on their own. In 2015, Trudeau ran on electoral reform. It was the thing that got him elected. And as soon as he realized that it would hurt his own chances at future elections, he abandoned it. Actually, while I was editing the video, yeah, literally at the 11th hour here, it's the evening of the 18th, Trudeau has actually come out and said if he's re-elected, he will revisit electoral reform. It is the most popular thing he's ever run on, but I have no idea why, 2 days before people go to vote, you would remind the electorate of your most embarrassing failure. I don't get it. Trudeau wants to have the power to regulate not only what you say online, but what content you consume online. Trudeau wants to confiscate by force legally owned guns from firearm owners. Trudeau supports using heavy-handed government tactics to force people to be vaccinated even if they don't consent. Trudeau refuses to end Canada's war on drugs. The list goes on. All of this, in addition to his use of the powers of his office to bully his own Attorney General, to bully the Speaker of the House, and invade the jurisdiction of how the House of Commons is run, to blatantly lie about almost every single thing he's ever said. And yet Justin Trudeau still has the nerve to call himself a liberal. This man is not a liberal. The Liberal Party under his leadership is not liberal. Trudeau is a tyrant. He's always been one, but he just really needed an excuse to really come out of the closet. And COVID-19 has given him one. And I expect, now that his grasp on power grows more unsteady by the day, he will become more and more tyrannical in order to keep it. That is your personal business. Nobody needs to know but you. The only thing I'll say is I will never, ever vote for Justin Trudeau.
They are putting at risk their own kids, and they're putting at risk our kids as well. People are putting us all at risk.
Trying to bring people together is not always compatible with science, with respect for human rights, with the best way to move things forward. I mean, when Aaron O'Toole talks about, oh yes, we need to unite people, we need to bring people together, he's talking about defending the rights of people who are anti-vax.
If anyone who doesn't have a legitimate medical reason for not getting fully vaccinated chooses to not get vaccinated, there will be consequences.